Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our commitment is to help, hope, and healing of our veteran family and our nation. I'm Jim Blythe, a U.S. Navy veteran and a certified senior advisor. Join us as we continue the mission of leadership and commitment to our communities and our great country. Why, you never know where we're going to go or who you're going to meet. We invite you to join in, plug in, and share in what we do. This is your Veterans Impact Show. Well, great day to you and welcome aboard. I'm Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy veteran. Unfortunately, Cedric is in the hospital and he can't join me today. Very special, so say a prayer for him. I want to say a very special thank you to DBTV Network for putting us on Amazon Fire, Roku, and AUN Network out in California. We're out there as well. Love San Francisco. This is a great opportunity today for you to join in and listen to one of the most knowledgeable congressmen I have ever met. I've known him for about 10 years. He was my congressman. Then he moved to Waco. He's still my congressman as far as I'm concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, audience, meet Congressman Pete Sessions from Waco, Texas. Pete, good day.
James, thank you very much.
When we first met, you and I were talking. We talked about a half hour, and I was amazed how much you know about Washington and what all is going on. Nobody is stronger or better than you. So what I want to do is focus on veterans issues, because that has been a big issue with you since I have known you. You worked with the Dallas VA. You worked to get hyperbaric oxygen in. You worked for positive changes. But right now, we've got a major problem. So let's just put it out on the table. Congress, we just passed a $3 billion stopgap resolution, is my understanding, to solve the problem, and yet we still are $12 billion short in the budgeting that was laid out for 2025. Can you tell us a little bit about that, why it happened, what's going on, and how this will resolve things?
Jim, I can, and thank you very much for your continued service, not only to the military community, but perhaps more importantly to the regular American citizens who need to understand that our United States military and their commitment to keeping us free and safe comes at a sacrifice. Sometimes that means loss of life, but many times it means a loss where people are doing hard jobs, doing things on our behalf. And that is why we have a Veterans Administration hospitals and clinics around the country. The VA obviously has a big job to do, but they also have a job to do that's directly related to helping people who suffer service-connected injuries to make sure they receive lifelong care. And that is what we're talking about here, is a commitment to the people who've kept us free. And you are right there every time, every week. As a member of Congress, I have the authority and responsibility, not just to understand this, but to make decisions with and for the VA, with and for the Department of Defense and the actions which they take. And then correspondingly, people do need medical care. Veterans affairs issues have long been an important issue for us. And in fact, we have many times underfunded the exact needs to make sure that the VA and its participating people were properly funded. The VA currently is going through what I believe is a struggle. They're going through a struggle, not just trying to balance money, but also trying to balance services that need to be made. And it has caused, in my opinion, an outcry from those people in the community, whether it be services that are available in the hospital or an outpatient. And about 17, maybe 16, we were struggling with the Obama administration about their long backlog that they had of people waiting long periods of time to maybe it's to go get new glasses. Maybe it's to get glasses. Maybe it's something more serious. And these backlogs resulted in the Congress getting into a fight with the Obama administration. As early as 2014, we were in a struggle with them. And those struggles were about not just getting enough money, it was about getting the right care and balancing the actions that would be necessary. It came pretty much at the end of the war. It became a point of circumstance with Afghanistan and Iraq, while them still serving members of the military from the Vietnam War. And this caused the United States Congress to do several things in and around the VA. First of all, it caused us to say that we felt like that there had been mistreatment, mismanagement of service-connected people who were in the hospital or receiving care. And we passed a law that said the VA could fire employees that did not properly conduct themselves in business. In particular, they could be fired outright where a death was involved. And so that was the first big change that Republicans felt like we had to give some balance to the patient. Secondly, we, by and large, created community care. Community care is an opportunity whereby on a timely basis, if the VA cannot properly handle you at a veterans hospital or a clinic, then you would be entitled for full compensation, whereby they would go and select people who are in the community who could do same or similar things. As it turned out that we were right. We were right as members of Congress that the Veterans Administration was delaying many, many, many months, regular opportunities for people to go to receive benefits and help. As a result of that, it turned in what totaled to about $200 million a month, $200 million a month, more than we had been allocated the VA. I'm not sure we completely understood the backlog that was out there, but the VA knew what it was, and they were, I think, reticent in trying to live up to that. So we are now coming into the Biden administration. The Trump administration put together a plan on two important viewpoints. Number one, the future. What would the change of the future look like? Where would people be located, and what would be necessary for the VA to find itself prepared for its future? That report came out about a year and a half ago. Took the VA several years to accomplish it. They did. We now have a moving forward plan about populations of veterans, needs of veterans, and then correspondingly where the VA feels like they need to be prepared with new facilities, whether that be a hospital or whether that be a clinic. Next, we undertook in 15 or 16, I was chairman of the House Rules Committee when we understood the basis of problems that many of our veterans, tens of thousands, were faced with as a result of the Iraq and Afghan war, mostly the Iraqi invasion going back to 1991, moving all the way forward. And that was where these members of the military encountered burn pits, things that were aligned with oil derricks, whereby there were the Iraqis burned many of those, destroyed them, which caused dangerous and hazardous toxic waste that was not just waste, it may have been something that was breathed. And many people came back and were reporting these problems. The VA properly identified that we have a problem, came to Congress. We said, we're going to send this to a centers of excellence. The military has a number of them, whereby they had a responsibility to vet and find out that from these burn pits, what were the things that presented themselves in people? Where did they present? How did they present themselves? what were the indications that a person was having problem and how severe that was, and then potential outcomes therein of either surgery, therapy, or hospitalization that would be necessary. This was sent to the VA. They came back with that full recommendation about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, and it became known as the PACT Act. The PACT Act was a piece of legislation that was handled by the Senate first on a bipartisan basis. They said, look, if you have service that was in the military, once again, service connected, but if you have these characteristics or these problems, we want to make sure that you can be fully covered with the VA, and Congress will take care of that. It came to the House. Nancy Pelosi and her chairman saw it differently. They wanted every single member of the military to receive this care, whether they had served, whether they had any symptoms or not, of not just burn pits, but full lifetime service. Well, we've not funded the VA that way. We did not give them the money then, and we certainly were not prepared to do it then. So finally, after a struggle, the Senate side PACT Act was agreed to. That has been costly. That has brought people into the hospitals. And I have a number of people who I personally know in Texas who have needed not only this legislation, but the answers that come therein. So that moves us all the way forward, Jim, to where we are in 2024 and 2023. At the end of the year, President Biden announced for Article 2 employees they would receive a 5% raise. But we did not give to each of the agencies a 5% increase that would correspond to that which had been given by the president. So immediately we knew that it would begin eating into the normal budget that an agency would have. So that is where we were moving along. And then in probably April or May, we began hearing stories about community care being unfunded, being delayed, people who were out as suppliers and providers in community care were being cut and not paid. A number of physicians that were in VA hospitals around the country were not hired properly, were not rehired. They did away with a huge number of surgeons. It became a problem for patients once again attempting to get their health care that previously had been uncontested and was provided pretty well on a regular basis. As we moved to August, I believe the VA did formally notify the committees, and that committee would be the Veterans Committee. And they notified them that there was a breakdown in the amount of money that they had. Congress was off all of August. We came back in September and found out, in fact, there's $3.5 billion that would need to be provided to provide services just till the end of the fiscal year, which was the end of September. We passed that. The Senate passed that. The president signed that into law. And for about the last 15 or 18 days of September, that $3.5 billion was necessary. So we're now in the new fiscal year. Today is October the 3rd. And once again, as you're reporting, there is not enough money. There's a shortfall, and I agree with that. But that's up to the VA and negotiators in the House and the Senate to get that done. I look forward to us trying to not just resolve this, but give our veterans the actual services which they not only need, but they richly deserve.
Well, it not only included the Gulf War veterans, but it included me because I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served in Vietnam on aircraft carriers. And those three presumptive conditions, Pete, I've got all three. Yeah. And the VA, I went to a meeting and did a live interview with Michael Kraus, who is director of Texas Benefits, and he took me by the arm and said, "You're going to sign up for the PACT Act right now." And I said, "Okay," and I have gotten benefits, and I am thrilled because it helped pay for the cancer treatments and the various things that I've had. So it's been a good thing, and it goes back to cover Vietnam veterans with Agent Orange and the toxic things that we were exposed to. That's a very good thing. One of the things, though, with this and the way it was handled, they just cut off community care. They stopped. And a lot of things, when you talk about the Mission Act and community care, it was designed as if somebody can't get the service within 30 days within the VA, then they can go to community care. It was also if there are treatments that are not provided in the VA, they can go to community care. And I know a number of community care providers around the nation have talked to me and said, we were just cut off. That's it. No word, wouldn't talk to us. And it's created financial hardships. It's cost jobs. It's also been a situation where a lot of veterans that were getting very specialized community care in counseling and other things were cut off. Now, this is not good. This is not good at all. And the communication from the VA has not been good. So I really try and stay positive. I want to see if we can find some things that can be positively done to help the VA, to help overcome these problems. And one of them, I think they have misaligned or misunderstood community care because there are a lot of services. I had Benjamin Kligler, who is, I believe, within the VA over integrative care on my program a few weeks ago. When we come back after these commercial messages, I'm going to tell you about Benjamin and what he's doing with integrative care and how there are things that can be done that may save the VA a lot of money, may be able to get some of our veterans off of oxycodone and other narcotics that are bad. And I want to tell you some stories that I've heard, as well as I'd like for you to tell any stories you've heard. So this is Jim Blythe, and I'm with Congressman Pete Sessions, probably the most knowledgeable man in Washington about what's going on. A huge, huge advocate of the VA. We want you to stick around because we're going to be talking about, we talked about the problems. Now, let's see if we can't come up with some positive solutions where we can all work together and bring this nation back together. This is Jim Blythe. You're watching Veterans Impact. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation.
My drink.
Yeah, Pete, what are some of your ideas that you would like to see done that we could basically improve the VA? It just seems like communication has stopped. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, in fact, Jim, we are finding where the VA at the highest levels as well as the local levels found themselves in a position where they were not having an adequate amount of money to fund the services and the needs of the community. And in not funding that, I think that they had a communication issue. They were not communicating within the VA. They were not communicating outside the VA. They were not communicating effectively with service providers. And thus what happened is that it became a bad circumstance where it became unknown why they were having problems. Rather than saying, we got a money problem, this PACT Act was bigger than we thought it was. We believe that the 5% increase in pay that all employees got impacts the amount of money we had. Well, every bit of that is true. But they have to say something. And I think that the Secretary of the VA found himself in a circumstance that was so difficult for him to effectively communicate in this large organization that they simply failed to get it done. We can, when we know things as members of Congress, we can react. When we know things as members of Congress where we're trying to work with the VA, we can react. But when we hear things from the grassroots, as opposed to the management of the VA or as opposed to people who then come and give us a heads up, we are not very good at responding. And this is why this took a long period of time. That went from May until probably September 10th.
Would one of your suggestions possibly be that, because I understand Secretary McDonough has told everybody he's resigning at the end of this election cycle, that we get somebody who is Secretary of the VA who, number one, has a military background and a medical background and an administrative background. I've met Secretary McDonough. He's a very nice guy. But I think that that would be like putting me in the pilot seat of a rocket ship going to Mars. I am not qualified. Not saying he's not a good guy, but I'm saying you've got the biggest medical system in the world. The biggest in the world is the VA. The VA also, 70% of all of your medical professionals in the United States spent time in the VA. I think the leadership of the VA needs to move from a political situation to being somebody with military background, with also a medical background, and with administrative background in the medical profession. This is a very specialized thing. Do you think that's possible?
Well, Jim, I think what you've outlined is reality. It's a tall order to get someone who actually is a medical professional who then can come and wants to sit down with a bunch of darn, I will call it members of Congress. I could use the word politicians. And it's kind of like apples and oranges. We have plenty of very talented people. We had General Shinseki a few years ago, and he struggled mightily. Maybe some people could say unsuccessfully, but he was in it for the right reason. It is a tall order, but let's just go right to it. Do we need to fix the VA? And that answer is yes. Does that mean we just dump money at it? Probably not just that. We need to actually have an understanding of what the focus is of the VA, and they are there to take care of people who, once again, and I think it's just a true statement, we will probably find out in 4 or 5 years how unprepared we have been when we deal with the Afghan and the Iraqi soldiers who come back. We've proven ourselves incapable to effectively be prepared for what we knew 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years ago was 22 Kill. 22 Kill is an organization, you don't have to like the name, but it was a reality that 22 members of our military who mostly were out were killing themselves. They were struggling mightily with not just mental, what might be mental issues, traumatic brain syndrome and other things, but it was them coming back, fitting back into society, a society that had moved very rapidly at a time when they were trying to defend this country. And there were a number of facts and factors about it. One, you could just jump on a plane and be back within a few hours, but also the intensity of the fight. And we learned this perhaps most with Marcus Luttrell. When Marcus Luttrell in Lone Survivor came forth with his book and the movie, and it showed firsthand. Chris Kyle, firsthand, how his work for the military, the things that he was thrust into on the front lines, and the people that they associated with, the young men and young women who were trying to not just represent our country, but survive in a terrible, terrible circumstance. We began hearing about a lot of this with Black Hawk Down, and moving then forward to the Afghan and Iraq experience. So what I would say to you is, yes, you're right, it's a tall order. Do we just need a person who is a military person? I don't know. Do we need a person who understands the needs? Yes. And would we want someone who could piece together those pieces of the military and of the political circumstances to be successful?
All right.
We do need that.
We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. This is Jim Blythe. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Heart's Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation. That was a mouthful, Congressman, that you were talking about. And I think you're right, trying to find the right person. Maybe the thing has gotten too big. I don't know. But I have always been successful in my business career in finding solutions to problems and getting people to work together. And I think that when you talk about congressmen and politicians and you do it with a smile, I'd like to say that you are a microcosm of our whole nation. We are all diverse, but we all have one goal, and that's to live in freedom and have opportunity. And we've got to be working together to do that. I think that there's some opportunities here that we can do that. So one thing I'd ask you about, then we were talking about, is the selection of leadership at the top. The second thing is transparency, communication. I think the bureaucracy in the VA has not been transparent with Congress. I'm hearing that. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, I think a lot of what you just said there is some in-between also. You'd say, well, what's the in-between of leadership? What's the in-between of working together? Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's actually coming together on the needs that fit. And that traditionally has been something that we sought for, perhaps as Republicans, but the Congress, I'll say all of us came together with community care. And I think community care, where it works, as expensive as it is, it needs to be more utilized and needs to be fully funded. But you see, we also know that community care may mean that a person would be in a hospital where they really would not understand necessarily all the needs of a military person who is in their care. For instance, people who have been in Afghanistan and Iraq might respond under certain circumstances to loud noises differently than they might if they were in a VA hospital. And the people who would be in that VA hospital would be perhaps more aware of these circumstances, of the needs of the patient. So it's hard to say a one size fits all. It's hard to say, well, let's just go to community care or let's just go to the VA. We need to put more money in it. We need more medical doctors, more professionals. I think this great young man, Jim Blythe, already mentioned that almost all, if not a huge part of the medical community, nurses, physicians, PhDs, have been through the VA system during part of their training. They understand the VA. They understand how it works. We need to give a better chance for success, not just money, but really an understanding about what we're trying to accomplish. And Jim, I think that is what we've got to do. So now comes in the great Jim Blythe. James Blythe talks to veterans all across this country, need to make sure that they are talking to their member of Congress.
Absolutely.
You can use my name. You can say, hey, Pete Sessions told me to call you. They all know me. And to say, let's look at a better funding. Let's look at calling Chairman Mike Bost, who is the chairman of the Veterans Committee, and expect that that member of Congress will go and check in to find out what are our needs, what is the direction we're going, and then get back with that veteran, giving them the assurance they've double checked on that. We all need to, last part, the great Jim Blythe says, work well together. And when we do that, we will discover things, A, that we did not know, and B, the needs of people and families that are in the circumstances where they're counting on this great nation to do what it said it would do.
It also is a thing, Pete, where I think the VA in the past has led the way in many medical things. One of the things that I mentioned earlier before we went to the break, integrative health. There are procedures and treatments that are not offered in the VA that are different. And I talked with Dr. Benjamin Kligler about this, who works for the VA in integrative health. Things like Tai Chi, things like acupuncture. There are various things that are proven medical treatments. One of the things is we've got to get our veterans off of prescription addictive drugs. And let me tell you something. I have talked to, I don't know how many, who said, man, all the VA did was send me to get pills, send me to get pills, send me to get pills. And I think we've got to look at some of these things, and the VA has started it, but they haven't really gone down that road. One of the things that I heard about, that I read in some of the press releases, was part of the problem is the expense of these drugs. What if we could get some of these guys off of the drugs? There are procedures and there are treatments that could do that and save the VA a lot of money. And I think we need to push on that, because there's always medical pushback when it comes to innovative treatments. Always. This goes back, how far do you want to go? And I think these are one of the things that we've also got to be doing, is Congress saying, we want you to investigate. We want you to do these treatments. We want you to do these studies that will save lives. And let me tell you, I've seen it. I don't know if you've ever met Pete Dimitri. He's in Washington, D.C. He was an Air Force bird colonel, a test pilot. He's got a foundation. They're looking at integrative health. The Symbios that I volunteer with, they're doing integrative health. I had a friend who was shaking so bad with Parkinson's, and I took him over there, and after they went through a very deep diagnostic, 3 treatments, and he could write his name for the first time in 3 years. There are treatments and things out there that will save money and save lives. This is another thing that I want to get our congressmen saying. We want you to be innovative. We want you to be creative. We want you to find things that not only save money, but get our veterans off the drugs.
And solve the problem.
Yes.
Heal the man.
Yeah, drugs don't solve the problem. They just make it worse. So that's...
Well, they can't. The protocols that you talk about, Brother Blythe, are important. Protocols that may begin with something, then end with something else. This is where we're trying to drive the VA, and much of community care is that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It is to drive a person to where they get healed, to where there is success. But we're engaged in something right now that is relatively new, and that is how to deal with answers of PTSD. Not a new issue, but some of the answers might be new, and they're very controversial. But we have found that in a study that was done of what are called psychedelics, these psychedelics help reroute the brain. And just as they did with psychedelics, and that when concocted differently, they do cause people to jump off buildings and think they can fly. These are the same types of things, but manufactured differently to reroute synapse, dendrites, the responses inside the brain to where the communication channel becomes more prepared to be successful. And it's controversial. So we went through in Congress this, what I would say seemingly was a deep dive. I was one of the strongest advocates for it because they said from the trial, 68% of people after 3 treatments could actually work in their life way better and perform better and could get back with their families. We still have too many people that are hanging out, so to speak, just off this thin wire because they have not overcome the ravages of the war or ravages of percussion or sound or traumatic brain syndrome and illness and problems. We need to keep working, as you just said, the great young Jim Blythe, work for success.
I think that's so important. And one of the things that I have learned, because I'm a broadcaster, but I've been introduced to some of these things, and I'm amazed by what I've seen. Amazed. And there's different procedures, different things. You mentioned one that I heard a lecture on the other day. Another thing I found out, and again, I'm not a medical professional, but if you go through traumatic brain injury, if you go through a traumatic situation, it creates chemical changes in your brain and your body. And these things have got to be straightened out. We see the same thing, not in the military, but Pete, with kids who have used drugs, used psychedelic drugs, kids and people who have become alcoholics. You've got to get their brain right before you can really communicate with them. Then you've got to have a program that helps them come out of these fogs. And this is so important to get veterans off the drugs and get them being healed. And it's not just one thing, which I'm an advocate of one, but I've run into so many, and that's why I mentioned Pete Dimitri. These and Symbios, these are things that can save lives. And like I say, the medical pushback, controversial, no doubt about it. But if we don't try, if we don't use our centers of excellence, which are about research, then what you didn't try will automatically fail because you don't know.
Every bit of this is true. And I think that I'd like to say that the VA is friends of the veteran. They're friends of Congress. They're friends of every one of us. Somehow they've gotten a huge job that seemingly has been an impediment to effectively communicating and working forward. Secretary McDonough is a personal friend of mine. I like Dennis. But
him
organizationally, too. We've got to go back to the drawing board. We've got to see it for what it is. And my unfortunate part is, whether you want to agree with this or not, I think that the people that overwhelmingly are in this area are not making this work. And I'm not saying top to bottom change, although we do that every single administration. These are political positions. I think that there are people who will get committed to their success, and I think that will be another administration.
Well, I think you really hit on something there. And again, communication is the key. I had, during the Trump administration, I had Secretary Wilkie on my program 3 times, and he was very open. I've had many members of the VA on my programs, and they're very, very open. I think that, again, what we've seen at this crisis because of the financial budget, everybody's pointing fingers, but we've got really good people in the VA. We've got really good people in Congress, and as you say, we can work together. It just broke down in this situation we're in right now.
Make no mistake about it, there was also money taken from the VA that would be for veterans, that this administration, on a political basis, made a decision that were more important to the President Biden and than they were funded for. And so money has been taken from the VA. I very clearly remember 2 and 3 years ago, money was taken large monies taken from the VA. There were a pot that were sitting there for veterans and hospitals for veterans that was moved directly to the border. That was moved for another emergency that this administration had created all by themselves. And so, look, we do fight. We do disagree. We disagree in Congress. We disagreed on the PACT Act. We disagree about the effectiveness of the running of the VA. And I will tell you, I've not taken my time during this hour to beat up anybody in particular, but I think that we've got to look for better answers. And I think a new administration will be very open to doing that.
Well, new administration or just a change in leadership, we're going to get one way or the other, because Secretary has said he's going to do that.
Well, but I think one team will keep a team in place and a new team will bring a different team in. And I hate to say this, Jim, but that's a fact.
Yeah. Well, I can't disagree. Now, with one of the things I wanted to ask you, though, with the $3 billion stopgap, will they reinstate community care? Because right now, everything I'm hearing, and unless I'm wrong, has been cut off. And that's a tragedy.
Including money they've earned.
Yeah, including money that they've earned.
We don't actually know that. I am touching base now that we've moved to October 1st. We got past September 15th to September 30th. You started this show by talking about they're still underfunded. They still don't have as much money as they want. But I think that there's got to be a question that's asked of the VA. What does this mean to you? What does this mean you're going to do month one, October 1st, until either January when you would be leaving office, or when January when you would be continuing in office? And I think that that's an answer we need to get to very quickly. I am seeking those questions and answers from people who are local, but Mike Bost knows that he has not been happy nor satisfied with the answers that he had received up until about a full week ago. When I talked to Mike and I are friends. We sit on the floor with each other. We spend a good bit of time. And Mike has a different view of success than what's currently being employed.
The proof is in the pudding, Pete. The proof is in the pudding. All right, we're going to take another break, and I want to say a special thank you to DBTV Network for getting us out on Amazon Fire and Roku. Fairway, my company. My MLS number is 311-548. 2289 is our corporate one. I do lending for seniors, but I'm also an advocate of veterans, so you can call me at any time. Subscribe, join us, be a part of this. You can call me at 214-502-4600. I'm here for you. Welcome back, and thanks to our great sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage, Healing Thine Hearts Ministry, and Symbios Integrative Health. Now, let's get back to this conversation. Well, Pete, we have had a great conversation about the VA. I'm in full agreement. I think there's a lot of really great people, but this crisis has brought to the forefront a bigger crisis, which needs to be communication, transparency, and planning. With a military background, I know we are taught to investigate, learn, overcome, adapt, basically work together. We are a team, because if you're not a team in the military, you're going to be a dead team. That's for sure. And so I think we can do all of that and work together and stop the finger pointing and start positive. What do we do? It's not just veterans that we're saving lives. It's Americans across the board.
Well, in fact, it is. And Brother Blythe, I want you to know that I deeply believe we live in the greatest country in the world. I deeply believe there's no problem bigger than a solution. But I do believe that it needs to be an important thing. And I think that in my book, there are some people that place a higher priority on bringing people in this country illegally than they are about serving the veterans. I think there are communities of veterans that struggled for me to explain how can they take that money when you by law provided that money for our benefit. And these are all questions that a normal, regular person would want to get answers, and we're trying to seek those. But we are now at a point where there is an election, and elections have consequences.
Yeah. And I think one of the important things is, hey, I'm not against people coming into our country, but let's have a plan. Let's give them educational capabilities. Let's give them where they can join the workforce, where they can be productive. And that's part of what I think our immigration policy, which I don't know enough about, maybe has been doing in a less than favorable way. But let's have a plan. Let's don't just open the border and here they come, millions of people. I talked with Sheriff Bill Wayburn, who also, he's a good friend of mine as well. Some of the horrible things that have been happening to women and children on the border and in these caravans are just unconscionable. It's not safe. Our border is not safe. Families are telling me from down there that you don't want to go out at night at all. It's a frightening situation. I am not against immigration. I am against not having a plan in helping people to be successful. Not a hand out, a hand up. And I think that's one of the most important things, that this nation has been a nation of opportunity, and we figured out ways to give people hands up, not hands out.
I don't think there's any question in my mind that the job which you have spoken about and the job and the performance that I have spoken about can be accomplished. Jim, it will require it being very important to someone. And I will tell you, I think it's important to a bunch of members of Congress. I think it's important to a bunch of veterans. And I will look forward to working with this new administration, whoever it is, of not only solving that problem, but having someone who can effectively focus on the needs, work hard for that, and advocate to continue that struggle on behalf of veterans and their families. And I think every single bit of this is possible quite easily because we live in the greatest nation in the world.
Absolutely. If we want to take care of people coming through our border, then let's say it. Let's allocate it, but let's don't steal it from somewhere else and then deny that you did it. Let's focus on how can we be transparent. And I think that that is a situation that I want to try and help with, to be positive. Lift people up. Don't tear them down. Don't bring them here to put them in a situation where they may be bondage to the cartel that brought them here, where they may be raped and humiliated. Bring them here and give them a chance. And for our veterans, don't rape them. They have served it. They wrote the blank check. I did it. 4 years on aircraft carriers in Vietnam, Pete. And as you know, maybe you don't know, you know who one of my squadron mates was? A young lieutenant commander that I was handed a piece of paper on October 26, 1967, and he was in my squadron, and I was doing Armed Forces radio, and they said, please announce Lieutenant Commander McCain has been shot down. You knew him as Senator McCain. I knew him as Lieutenant Commander McCain. I got to tell you, we got to take care of all Americans.
Well, we agree with this, and this is where the conversation that you have every single week with veterans, where you have conversation and encourage them to follow a pathway of success, not just asking the VA, not just asking their member of Congress, but bringing things to your show to discuss them, to highlight them, and then others who are like you passing that on. This is where during my service and tenure in Congress, I've been tried to be very close to Navy SEALs, Stephen Holley, a number of others who are from the Dallas area, Roger Staubach, United States Navy, Chad Hennings, United States Air Force. And they have a firsthand knowledge of not just the capacities of this, but the use of them and how important they are. And it's these people, Roger Staubach in particular, would take time with me, and he had some very specific ideas. But it also is true of Ken Watterson, who sits in the VA right now in Dallas.
Great friend.
Who understands firsthand what needs to be provided. James Blythe, who understands the VA, who understands its good parts and the parts that we need to make better. It's this putting together that's got to be done by members of Congress.
I want to help every way I can. So quick prayer, dear God, thank you for the hedge of protection around our active duty military, our first responders, those that run into the fire, not away from it. And thank you, dear God, for bringing this nation back together where we can be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This is Veterans Impact. We're here for you.